When we often think of the word inclusivity, we often relate it to probably policies, mission statements, carefully worded emails, and grand gestures. I mean, even our school has our own set of policies for inclusion, so this is pretty intuitive. But the point I'm trying to make here is, I don't want to talk about the usual sense of inclusion, the sense of inclusion that only lives in boardroom. I want to talk about the sense of inclusion that lives in something else, in the clatter of porcelain, the hiss of steam, and the chaos of a crowded room. 大家好, I'm Cecilia. Hi, I'm Cecilia. I want to talk about something we're very well known of, and to be very honest, very proud of at the same time. I want to talk about yangca. Yangca is probably one of the proudest things in our Cantonese heritage, and it can be related to dim sum at times. At a glance, it's just a meal. And to be honest, it's just a meal too. But deep down on the inside, it's not just a meal. It could be one of the most radical, sophisticated social technologies used for inclusivity that exists. But to really consider the inclusion point of view of why yangca is such a great tool for us, I don't think it's just about the food that we love, but more intuitively, it's about the architecture that builds this up. So in my language, I like to say the round table, the spinning disc, and the cart. Starting off with what we're most well known of, the round table. For the round table, it's probably something we usually dine on, but it's something a lot more spectacular than that. In Western culture, the table itself is often a rectangular form. The head holds most power, and the least powerful would often sit down below. That means people, or like the CEOs who sit on the top, can usually ignore or exclude people down way far at the end of the table, which is usually next to the kitchen, unsurprisingly. Hierarchy itself is not just used within the house, it's baked into the furniture quite intuitively. But why exactly then in a yangca scenario does this not exist? I mean, mathematically, it's a circle, so that explains a lot. But moreover, it's not just a circle. It's a circle with no head, it's also a circle with no foot. By that I mean, every single seat around the circle is adjacent to the center. And when I say the center, that means your status, your salary, your reputation, your title even sometimes, they all go away. Why? Because the most important distinctive fact right now is your proximity or your distance to the steamed basket with the food you like. So is anyone actually going to question who you are, what your background is? Not really. People are there just to eat. But I want to talk about something else then. If we really made a comparison today about what the rectangle holds, why exactly is the rectangle such a huge form of distinctive non-inclusion? I want to talk about two things here then. First, when you have a rectangle out there, since people with the most power sits on the top and with the least power sits on the bottom, there is already one biggest hint right there. Silence is now being a norm, and even hierarchy now is being unchallenged. When we talk about the unchallenged hierarchy, or let's say having silencing become a norm, this means the CEO from right on the top, or the most powerful person, now has the inherent exclusion to realize that there might not be anyone sitting down below, and the most least powerful on the table at the end of the table now has to realize that because they're too quiet enough, they will never relieve any acknowledgement. This insight is the fact and the problem with having a rectangle structure. But most importantly, I would concede though, obviously the rectangle is not perfect, neither is a circle. The rectangle is great for control, but horrendously for belonging. And since belonging is the center of my speech today, I want to talk about why the circle itself rebuts all of that. In a circle, it forces the CEO to sit next to the intern. It forces you, as a quiet person, to get acknowledgement from the people. It has all of us to be this acknowledgement that, hey, we're not dining alone. It's not a fine dining restaurant where you get your own portion of a meal. It's a collective community of family together where we all eat together, we share plates, we share food, and we have this conversation going among us. There's no hiding at a dining table, especially when it's a circle one. And something I like to refer to is, it's either you come, you're present, or you're forever absence. By that I mean, it's either you come, you participate, you join in, or you never come in the first place. Therefore, inclusivity now in its most literal sense requires us to remove all of our social barriers. When we take away the distinctive understanding of what your background is, who you are as an individual. For example, a lot of the times grades define us as students. At a round table is taking away the money, the salary, your title that defines you as an individual. It's taking those social barriers away and realizing who you are as a person and what your job is within the circle. Now that, I like to call it, is the first lesson of a Yum-cha scenario. Because before a single dish arrives, before the tea is poured, before the steam basket even arrives on the table, the lazy Susan, which is a spinning disc, it's actually a slang by the way, the furniture itself already does the job of inclusion. And we might think, oh, so does that mean the round circle itself is a form of permission for inclusion? No, not exactly. The round table itself is permission itself. In the most nuanced form, with the round circle, permission itself is already a given. You don't have the ability to say no to it because the minute you sit down and get ready for this dining experience, you are already part of permitting inclusion. But then, let's not forget the very important mechanism on top of this, the spinning desk. Let me point it, that thing right there. You can't really get a normal experience to share if you don't have a spinning disc, right? Because I wouldn't say anyone has arms that are 2 meters long. I don't think that really exists. That exactly then is the mechanism of the spinning disc. And people say, oh, it's just a form of convenience. Yup, it is a form of convenience, but it's much, much more important than that. It's actually one of the most important utility mechanisms of sharing. Let's, for example, when a dish arrives, out of all of these dishes, I could tell you that those are definitely my favorite. I love haggaos. And when they arrive on the table, you probably would pass it towards the elders first. You would just gently spin the disc and it would arrive at the elder. And then you might share it to the guest who hasn't tried it yet. And then finally to the people next to you. But when it comes to you, you might realize something. There's nothing more. It's just an empty steam basket. I think this is one of the most key criteria of what we call inclusion to be. You don't always get your share. Sometimes you get what you want, and sometimes it's just an empty steam basket. So in a truly inclusive environment, you might always just be the person who has to sacrifice for the communal benefit. You might be the person who has to realize that, hey, I can't get that portion anymore for the sake of this inclusive environment. This is what I like to call the sacrifice for proper inclusion. But then, here's a more fundamental example, lawmaking. It's basically a glutinous rice chicken wrapped around in a lotus leaf. It's really delicious, by the way. You open the leaf, you take a portion, but you will realize that in Yum-cha, people don't usually take the full portion because it somehow comes in one portion and not like four in a steam basket. So when you take a portion now, someone might take the pork, other people might take the yolk, you might even just take the rice. This is what I like to call taking a portion for yourself for the sake of inclusion. The lawmaking itself is a definition of shared abundance. Notice when somebody tries to hoard this whole dish for themselves. The spinning disc, even when it is there, it stops working because if somebody really tries to hoard all of these resources with themselves, then it's gone, it's done. Even with a spinning disc, there's no really the proper utility mechanism behind it. In our society, we often talk about how inclusion is giving everybody a seat. In Mexico, they give women quota in the parliamentarian so women could have a better voice. But is that really what we're looking towards too? I wouldn't say so. Why is that? Because the lawmaking example I just gave right now is a proper explanation of why inclusion is not about the present. It's about sharing the resources and circulating them around you. Even the woman in Mexico does have a better share in the parliament, where they do have, a better voice to be heard. It's not always the case, because sometimes the votes just fall into the other majority of the table. So with these two examples in mind, I like to come to a very short conclusion, which is inclusion itself is not about you arriving on the table and naturally conforming to this inclusion. It's about you and your other people realizing that maybe you should ask before you take the last portion, or maybe this whole dish isn't just for yourself. Maybe it is what we call split inclusion between you and also people dining next to you. But then, when we build these inclusive spaces, you always ask yourself, right? Even in a school environment, a communal environment, in a business, you don't always say, hey, if I get this job opportunity, then it's probably mine. You often ask yourself, what is the lawmaking reference that I can do parallel within this example? It could be an opportunity, it could be funding, visibility, accountability, transparency even sometimes. Where are these resources going towards? Are they circulating within us? Are they benefiting as a whole? Or am I just a teeny tiny bit selfish and grasping them all to me? This is probably the question people are more likely to ask when in times of inclusion compared to this lawmaking example right there. Therefore, the spinning dish example I'm trying to give is not that you should always spin the dish towards other people first, even though it's a pretty good, attitude that you should probably have. But the thing I'm trying to make sense here is spinning disc itself is not just a form of passive inclusion when you dine together. It's an active and continuous effort of trying to all prove inclusion with you, the people next to you, the people next to you, even out in the wild behind you. It's all about that. It's not just about you trying to get the dish for yourself, but understanding that there are people out there who probably share this opportunity with you, and that you guys together can have this communal benefit. But I want to talk about something really quickly. These cards. And if you haven't seen them, I think it's totally okay, because honestly, these are not that apparent anymore in Yangcha culture these days, but these used to be the main functional item that we all need. Why? Because without the card, you don't have the food. It's kind of that simple. But regardless of that, I want to talk about why the procession of this card through the aisles means so much more to our culture than just being the holder for food items. This is when inclusivity itself becomes uncomfortable, and yes, there is a contrast in my speech. Why does it become uncomfortable then? You see, there's a lot of items on this card, and they're probably not all you want. I want the hangout, but I don't really want the chicken feet, because, does everyone like chicken feet in here? I hope you do, because I love it. But, eating the feet of an animal does sound a little odd sometimes. But, once again, the point here is, when you have the chicken feet that comes to you, you make this idea of, should I try something that sounds a little odd, a little weird, but could be tasty in the end? Or should you just stick to what you've known all your life, flavors that you're familiar with? I'm sorry if you don't like chicken feet, but here's a really beautiful picture I found online. Chicken feet here, it's the truth. Chicken feet are really hard to eat. If you've ever had one, you know they're very glutinous. It's very hard to eat it very gracefully or with an elegant manner. You gotta really dive deep into the dish to really get the flavors out. And honestly, that doesn't usually look good in a type of scenario, but they're so tasty. So here's the question. Are you willing to sacrifice something you've known all your life for the sake of this chicken feet? Now, why am I talking about sacrificing your favorite food for a chicken feet? Because like any society out there, you don't always get what you want, right? The cart might come through your line and there are opportunities stacked on opportunity. For example, sometimes you might like to share ideas with people you have the same preferences to. If you prefer an idea, then I prefer it, then we could be friends. If you don't prefer it, then maybe we're a little off. But again, it's about taking opportunity as a type of presence. Would you rather take it as a blind box and think that it could turn into something new, or would you rather stick with something you're more familiar with? So I came up with a choice. You would rather try the chicken feet, which is something new, something that could be tasty, but is a little weird, or would you rather stick with the lomege or the egg tarts, the more familiar dishes that we have, and some of the more familiar items that we probably prefer more of the times? So this phoned out example here is an idea of discomfort within inclusion. You don't always get inclusion by feeling comfortable. You can't include people that, you can, but it's hard to. It's hard to really include people that share the same ideas with you. And that's just our blatant reality. People next to you might share an ideally polarized opinion with you, but you guys still could work it out with each other. And this is what I like to take the metaphor as with. So if your table only serves what people on there agree on, is there even a food item on the table? I don't know. Because you can't really suppose that everybody always has the same food idea with you, or always has the same likings with you. It's a different preference, in our society. You can't just suppose that everyone has the uttermost similarity likings with you, or preferences or ideologies with you. Therefore, I like to call it take away the echo chamber and take back what's new. You would rather take back ideas from people that you've never known, but is new, is strange, but could be acceptable, than rather being formed in an echo chamber where you only hear your echoes again and again and again. This is how improvement works, and instead of being stagnated. So, in our communities, we often claim to want diversity, but only the same kind, the egg tarts. It's an egg in a tart, it's better than custard in a tart, but it's still an egg in a tart. So something new or something we've known all our lives could be probably the dish that we would refer to as most. But let's be realistic. This is not always a structure you get in Yangcha or anywhere else. You don't always get ideas that are similar with you, and you don't always get ideas that are different from you. It's taking out a blind box. It's having the courage to stand there, to understand, to appeal to ideas that are different to you. But I'm going to be realistic, because it would be really off for me to try to stand here and tell you that the Yangcha culture was inherently perfect. It would be very remiss for me to say that the Yangcha culture was, somehow generally always about inclusion. And the reason why I brought out this inclusion point was because I'd like to take a little note on the Yangcha history. For Yangcha, or the dim sum culture in Canton, it hasn't always been inclusive. We had male-dominated times when people trying to share and secrete their power through paying the bill. Sounds off, but it is true. And then something else I'd like to point here is, Because these are the specific rituals that alienate a newcomer, where people have inside jokes, the language itself, the way you move your chopsticks. These are all little minute details that alienate with you to the person who doesn't speak Cantonese, to the person who is not exactly familiar with chopsticks, or to the person who hasn't really accepted the chicken feet yet. This is the reality our Yamta culture that I'm very proud of has been going through for the last century. So this is the crucial point. Inclusivity itself is not about pretending that history doesn't exist, but it's about taking out the history, taking out our scars, and then telling you why it's better right now. But furthermore, I like to just end this with a little thing. The true magic of modern Yamta is not one that is entirely perfect. It's not one that is naturally inclusive, I'd say. It is one that if you work with it actively instead of passively, it could turn into an utterly amazing and intuitive, inclusive ritual. So when I sit down this meal with my family, the ritual is not to compete until the teapot is filled, or in Cantonese culture, you like to tap 2 fingers on the table as a way of thanks. This culture didn't come from an alienation, it came from simple service and humility. In a truly inclusive Yamta environment, the person pouring the tea is not always a server. It could be the CEO for the intern. It could be the more extroverted person for the more introverted person. It could be the Cantonese person pouring it for the newcomer, for the foreigners. It could be anyone. This dynamic duo never had to be a low to a high or a powerful to non-powerful. It could just simply have to be you and me, people without any background, but simply for the love of food and for the love of this dining experience. In this sense, inclusivity itself then is a poured ritual. It's the willingness to serve others on the table before serving yourself. It's a humility to tap your finger in thanks when you understand that the other person next to you may not share the same ideas with you, but is still in touch with you intuitively in idea speaking. Therefore, this whole thing that I've put together is not here to teach us that inclusivity is automatically gotten the minute you sit on the table, but that in order to build a community, if you're afraid to share plates, if you're not going to accept ideas at all, if you're always just going to reach out for the egg tart, it stagnates, it slows down, it doesn't really move forward. The only way you really move forward with inclusion is when you actively engage with it, when you understand that people behind you, next to you, in front of you, share ideas that are inherently different from you. It's the natural inclusion to notice that, hey, I could try the chicken feet. It might not be that weird in the end. It ended up liking it, maybe to some degree. So, finally, I want this whole experience to tell you that the meal is never over until the tea is poured. It's never over when the newcomer finally learns the chopsticks. It's never over when the person who never speaks Cantonese now pulls out a beautifully phrased in Cantonese. It's this simple language of architecture that builds inclusion between us. It's my proud heritage. So with that, I like to say the round table, the spinning disc, and the cart is the true value of this Cantonese culture of Yamta. Thank you so much.